Let's bring in another prominent journalist, Michael White from The Guardian, often a guest on Sky News. Michael, it's certainly The Guardian has been chasing this story, has been investigating it for months, if not years now. In a way, the fruition of another form of investigative journalism has helped to bring this about. How do you feel about it, though, seeing at the end of it a great old newspaper going down?
Well, I sympathise with a lot of what Roger Alton said, and certainly with my colleagues here at the Press Gallery in Westminster, where I work. We all work together, and nobody likes to see a newspaper go down. As for The Guardian, well, yeah, it was proper investigative journalists. The broadsheets, people like us, are laughed at a bit by the heavy mob on their red tops. They think we couldn't find our way to the lavatory without help. But The Guardian has done some pretty serious stuff in recent years. And the bad thing about what's happened is, as one of your earlier callers, Chris Bryant, he was on the train, Roger Alton was at a meeting. You've got all of me, Jeremy. That Chris Bryant said a lot of this could have been sorted out years ago, but the instinct was to close ranks and cover it up, and it's just got worse, and it's ended up with James Murdoch's rather dramatic decision today. I don't know James Murdoch, but his reputation is that he doesn't like newspapers, unlike his father. Rupert Murdoch was a newspaper man through and through, still is. He's cracking on a bit, and his son isn't. So that's part of the calculation, but not the only part.
I will just burden you with the news here that from Sky sources that Rebekah Brooks, who's in overall charge of the newspapers in the News Corps world in Britain, was in tears as she told News of the World staff of the decision. Rebekah Brooks, seen there in the days when she was editing the paper, in tears this afternoon as she told News of the World staff the decision to close it down after this Sunday's edition, with the loss of certainly a couple of hundred journalist jobs and many others behind the scenes who put the paper together. Michael White from The Guardian, is this going to do the trick? Is this what those who have been so critical wanted to see? Does it bring an end in any way to this whole affair of phone hacking?
No, because we don't know the scale of it. One of your callers said, I was listening to the programme, other people involved in this. I'm sure that's true. I had a nasty call today from an ex-MP with a story which I won't burden you with. You know, we in the press, we put the MPs in the dock sometimes, and we put footballers and everybody else. It's our turn to be in the dock, and it's not going to be very comfortable. I have to say, I suspect some of the people at the back in the News of the World newsroom this afternoon might have thought it would be better if Mr. Murdoch had closed down Mrs. Brooks rather than close down his newspaper. But I also have to report breaking news. In the Press Gallery across the road, we've all put our heads together and think this is partly about a cost-cutting exercise. There's some of it in the FT this morning, I'm sure it was in other papers too, which says News International trying to cut costs, and that the News of the World will disappear, but perhaps the News of the Galaxy or even the Sun on Sunday will appear. You can't have a Sunday Sun because, as your Geordie readers know, the Sunday Sun is a lively Sunday newspaper published in Newcastle, has been for many years. But I don't think this is the full story. I don't think Mr. Murdoch, dare I say it, is being frank with us entirely, not for the first time this year.
What about Mr. Murdoch Sr., Rupert Murdoch, who's been behind this group for many, many years now and has certainly been vilified as the grand figure in all this over recent weeks? Does it in any way change what people will think about him, the criticism aimed at him, and in a way the decisions that are bound to be talked about concerning B-Sky B and his attempts to take over, to buy out the rest of the shareholding there?
Well, B-Sky B, which includes, of course, Sky News we're on now, was part of Murdoch's creative genius. He's a brilliant businessman, and as I said a moment ago, he's also a pretty good newspaper man, has been since he was 21, 22, inherited his father's newspaper in sleepy old Adelaide, Australia. He's conquered the world. He's a very tough customer, and I guess it must be, if we're being generous, be difficult to be one of his children. And James Murdoch is trying to show here part of the family drama, a bit like those Miliband's, who's the tough guy, showing that he can take tough decisions too. As I say, I think cost-cutting, rationalisation, the News of the World brand is damaged. I'm not sure it would have been as damaged forever. People have short memories, you know, advertisers, readers, everybody. So I think people, Tommy Watson, the MP who said it'll never sell any more copies, you know, frankly, I don't think he's right. But they've taken a decision to fold it, and I hope many of those 200 journalists get jobs elsewhere within the organisation with whatever they do. They certainly can't be in the British newspaper market without a Sunday red top, whatever you call it.
Michael, you talk about the brand Murdoch being damaged. What about the brand Cameron? There's certainly been a lot of flack heading his way today that he'd got too close to the Murdoch empire, got too close to this newspaper group. Not that he'd be the first Prime Minister to get close.
No, that's certainly true. You know, this is an old story going back a century. Lloyd George said, with the press you either square them or squash them. Well, Tony Blair tried to square them. He talked to all sorts of newspaper editors and proprietors, as you and I both know, with moderate success for several years. Had a bit of a job with Paul Dacre at the Mail, who thought he was a rascal and much preferred Gordon Brown. He thought he was a fellow provincial Puritan, just like himself. Well, that didn't do Gordon Brown much good in the long run. Margaret Thatcher was, I suppose, Rupert Murdoch's only real heroine in this country. Though he tolerated Blair, he could see he was a winner. Got favours out of all of them, I hasten to add. David Cameron's case is a bit different. We get the impression that Mr. Murdoch doesn't take to old Etonians. You know what he thinks for the British establishment. He's made his view very clear. He still thinks of himself as an anti-establishment figure, though he is one of the 100 most powerful people in the world on most opinion polls. I guess you can't take Adelaide out of the boy even when he's famous world over. But David Cameron got close to Rebekah Brooks, who can be very charming, and of course hired Andy Coulson, the former editor, the editor of the News of the World, who had to resign over the royal correspondent hacking business when the paper tried to pass it off as the rogue reporter. I think Mr. Cameron was a bit short-sighted about that and a bit careless, and his brand, as you say, will probably suffer too. But he's a pretty resourceful politician, Cameron, and he took the right decision to concede an inquiry, 2 inquiries, let's have two for the price of one. This week, and that was a smart thing to do. And if he's nimble, he'll get out from under this one, but it may well have to involve crossing a few names off his Christmas card list.
And on that very point, Michael, you've been in Westminster yourself for a good few years. I won't stress the point too much, but will this, do you think, once and for all, change the relationship between politicians and journalists and newspaper proprietors down there at Westminster?
No, and it's true the world over. Back to what I said a minute ago, square 'em or squash 'em. Enoch Powell once said, there's no use complaining about the press, it's like sailors complaining about the weather. Although we're quite close to each other, we're rather like a very tense marriage. We do bad things to each other, we quarrel, we fall out, we attack each other, we get people sacked, they occasionally get us sacked. It's a very fraught relationship because the politicians want to use us to sell their message and send their agenda out to the voters, and we want to send our own agenda out to the voters, and the poor old voter and the viewer and the reader has to put up with both of us, and I sometimes feel very sorry for them. We've been talking about ourselves a bit too much this week. Let's find something else to talk about as the dust settles on this drama.
Thank you very much indeed. Michael White from The Guardian there.